For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon Durayhove. I'm speaking to Ebrahim Fakir of the Electoral Institute for the Sustainability of Democracy in Africa about President Jacob Zuma's State of the Nation address. Welcome, Ebrahim.
Thank you.
Now, President Jacob Zuma will be doing his State of the Nation address on Thursday. What are the main issues that you're hoping he'll cover in that address?
Well, I think we expect that the opening of Parliament and the State of the Nation address is going to give us at least some stock of where we are as a society and as a country, what government has done over the last year, particularly since the last State of the Nation address, and cover all the issues that were outlined in the previous State of the Nation to give us an update of how far government has gone, what the challenges are, and then of course the second thing I think we would look for is what is the state of the society, what is the state of government as we are right now. And then of course lastly, naturally we expect what would be the outline of government's program for the year going forward. Now, given that those are the three broad areas one is looking at, one hopes that the State of the Nation address becomes something which is going to be both inspiring, but also something which is fairly executive-minded in the sense that it tells you administratively what government practically aims to do. Now, I say if we take the first area, what has government achieved and what are the challenges? I think we need to look at two things. One, there were a whole range of measures. There were a whole range of actual budget allocations which were announced, not just by the finance minister, but also by the president in the State of the Nation. Allocations around what would go to stimulating industry, what would be going to stimulating manufacturing. And I think we need to ask critical questions about whether the public service departments have in fact started not only formulating policy, but also implementing policy. But I think there's a flip side to this too, and this is a question society has to begin to ask itself, particularly those who are looking for jobs, those who are hoping to be entrepreneurs, but also those who are hoping to invest. And that is, what have they done to start capitalizing on some of the allocations which have been made? Because I think that we reached a stage in society where there's just such an expectation that someone else is going to organize jobs, someone else is going to stimulate industry, someone else is going to pull our manufacturing sector out of the slump that it's in. And no one else is going to do it unless citizens, those who are seeking jobs, actively go out to seek it, those who are in business create those jobs, those who are investing actually capitalize on some of the programs that government has in fact announced with regard to industry, manufacturing, and anywhere else. I think what this year's speech is going to focus on is a shift towards some kind of infrastructure spending. But I think we need to be very careful and very critical in looking at what areas of infrastructure we're looking at. Because I think one of the big problems in South Africa, and this relates to even to issues of exchange control, it even relates to issues of the strength of the currency and so forth. Of course, there's a big debate about whether, well, let's just stick to the infrastructure things first. I think we need to look at whether we're going to have massive expansion in the road, rail, freight, and also shipping and those kind of areas, whether we can actually get our goods moving out. Because insofar as we are a commodities producer, I think some of our commodities producers could well start to produce a lot more than they currently are and exporting a lot more, even if it's in raw form. But there's very little point in them doing so if none of the stuff can be shifted. So if none of the supply chains, none of the kind of logistical arrangements, none of the warehousing and storage and all of those facilities are in place, there's no point for these guys to keep producing because they have no way to keep it, they have no way to send it, they have no one to transport it, and they have no one to actually get it out to people they want to supply to. So I think that's the first area of infrastructure we would look at. The second, and I think the theme which would emerge fairly strongly, is the question of education, skills, because this is, of course, South Africa declared the year of the knowledge economy. And a knowledge economy is basically based on knowledge, and knowledge is information and education. But if we look at our performance in the education sector, particularly those coming out of schools, it's in fact been dismal, in spite of all the kind of rhetorical flourish which emerged after the last matric examination results. The reality is that many of our tertiary institutions, further training and education institutions, are in fact struggling to get people out of the system who are in fact able to start getting into jobs, but also who are unable to be critical citizens or critical employees, who are to be in jobs and to be able to think systematically about what in fact needs to be done in their jobs. So I think that there's going to be some announcement of kind of infrastructure development even with respect to education. But I think in education, again, we have to ask another difficult question, away from what government's going to do and what society is going to do. Because the reality in both of these sectors, whether it's in the economy, as I've just pointed out, whether it's been education and in the knowledge sector, some kind of very serious thinking is going to have to take place amongst society and social actors about what they're willing to put in to the system to make it work to best effect. And I think citizens have in fact taken a back seat, hoping that some miracle is going to happen without application, and we'll suddenly get these wonderful outcomes. And I'm afraid I don't think that our society is in fact showing that kind of hunger and that kind of thirst for engaging productively and meaningfully in the economy. If we talk about a shift away from the knowledge economy again and go towards the economy again, and here I'm not sure that they will touch on the question of nationalization and the policy of nationalization, even though the ANC is soon going to release its discussion document of the commission research that it's done. But of course it's been leaked, and there's been questions around higher taxation, as one option in the mining sector. But I think there again, it relates to themes that run through all the State of the Nation addresses. Large amount of resources dedicated to particular portfolios in government, but very often departments underspending that money, governance really being lackluster in terms of oversight and in terms of accountability for what in fact happened with money which is spent, and accountability for money which isn't spent. And here you would have to ask yourself a question, well, what happens if a state has more resources but is already critically underperforming in areas where it has both control and influence in the economy? What is the point that they would have more resources if they aren't able to use it to good effect? So I think that there is a different kind of conversation which needs to happen, and one would hope that the State of the Nation address would stimulate it, but I doubt that it will. And that is that, can we get the private sector, particularly those who have the agency and the ability in society to start making a change, to start committing to creating a set number of jobs per year? And that's one of the other big themes that I think are going to be big in the State of the Nation address, the creation of jobs. But in reality, we've announced job creation initiatives over the last two State of the Nation addresses, and both of those haven't in fact materialized to the extent that they ought to have. In fact, instead of creating jobs, I think as a net, as a total, the economy in fact has shed jobs. So, I think it's a massive challenge, the State of the Nation address, but the reality is that we have to contextualize this, and this contextualization would have to go as follows. One is that the President has proved himself to be a facilitative leader rather than an incredibly decisive one. Some people would say, well, he was quite decisive. He got rid of ministers that he had to get rid of. He announced an investigation into an arms deal. He's taken measures and acted on the public protector's reports. Well, there's a happy coincidence for the President in those instances, and those happy coincidences are that there are objective reasons that he was forced to have to act in this way. I mean, a public protector makes public a series of findings about sitting ministers. No president can conscionably not act on these, so he had to act on this. There's also a happy coincidence between the fact that he announces some of these initiatives because they help his cause in his own internal ANC battles in wanting to remain president of the ANC. So, there's a happy coincidence. I'm not sure that that's an indicator of massive decisiveness. I think the president, if he's going to get a second term, is going to have to start acting more decisive, and this is the moment in which to do it, because he's literally mid-term in his term of office as head of state. And with an election year for the ANC internally, but an election year 2 years hence for the society as a country, I think he's going to defer to the fact that he has to play his cards very carefully because of the internal battles in the ANC, won't want to overcommit himself, or want to show that he still remains a facilitative leader which is going to listen to all the different sectors that make up the ANC ideologically, and also all the different alliance partners. And unfortunately, on some of the initiatives, I think we may be held back because they may require bold and decisive leadership by the president to actually say, this is the line of march and this is where we're going to go. I don't know if he's going to in fact do that for two reasons, and those two reasons are it's a midterm address firstly, and secondly he's facing an election in his own party this year, so yes, he's going to try and be careful about that. Lastly, I think we look at the question of international relations as we usually do, and I think there we haven't performed terribly well, because we've made a bungle on Libya, and it looks as if Syria is on the horizon, where there's going to be huge international furore emerging around it. There's no consensus about what ought to be done, and once again it appears as if South Africa backed the wrong side in this, and may find that in terms of what unfolds, we don't really like the kind of symptoms as a society of what's happening there, because those indicate shifts in the international balances of power, in which the context you have the rise of India and China, two powers, and older powers exerting their influence much more aggressively and much more violently, rather than softly, rather than culturally, rather than through the economics and investments that they may have done through over the last few decades. But because their own societies, in fact, also have economies which are in sharp decline. And so, these things stimulate their own economies because they stimulate production, they stimulate jobs, they get people into doing things where they may not have been doing.
Well, thank you very much for your analysis.